You're listening to TFM.
Want to join in the conversation and share your thoughts on this episode? Join the Babel Conference, our listeners' discussion group on Facebook. Just type BABEL into the Facebook search field, and we'll look forward to seeing you there.
Hey everyone, I'm Rod Roddenberry, and you're listening to Trek.fm.
Are you taking all these books? I thought I'd take some light reading. Guess I got bored.
Hello, and welcome to TFM's local books and comic show for Star Trek, and I am just one of the hosts here, Matthew Rushing, and I'm so excited that with me here to talk about some New Earth, Casey Pettitt.
Hello.
Hey, Casey, how are you doing today?
I am good. I am ready for the New Earth.
Oh, yes. Me too. I got a question for you. Do you ever just feel like you have a case of the Tuesdays?
Yeah. every Tuesday, and sometimes on Mondays.
Yes. Yeah.
Which makes Monday even worse, but...
It's true. It's very true.
Yes.
Yeah.
I don't think we have anything that's going to be installed on next Tuesday, though.
No.
I think we're safe.
Yeah. You know, it's such a great poll. I didn't even think about the Star Trek Generations reference there. But yeah, you know, Tuesday's just not a great day because things are always trying to get installed there. And so, anyway, but we don't really, I mean, there's no Star Trek book news yet. And as we're recording this, the big Star Trek convention happening in Chicago hasn't happened yet. So maybe we'll get some news there book-wise as to what's going to be coming out. So otherwise, we are going to be just diving back into the New Earth series with Belle Terre. Casey, so I wanted to ask you, before we even kind of got going on anything that we had kind of outlined to talk about, we both kind of had some frustrations with this first book. And so I just wanted to start right up front with how you felt like this book did. I mean, and just kind of getting into it. Did this book make you feel better about the series? Were you more excited about reading it and through it? And like, just how did you end up feeling about this book overall? Which is kind of a weird place to start, but we just had such an issue with the first one. Did this one get better?
Right. Before we start just cutting something down. No, I was a little trepidatious going into this one. I've read all of these books before, but I remember absolutely zero from them. But this book was far and away better than the first one. I feel like this would actually almost have been maybe not so much a good first book of the series, but I feel like what it did was gave us, I don't know, more to do. More, it felt more like a Star Trek story. In the last one, I said maybe it would have been a better book if it hadn't been set in the Star Trek universe and it was just some other sci-fi adventure. This one felt very Star Trek to me, and it had a lot of adventure, a lot of heart, and left a lot of threads open where you could see them taking things. And while the first book did, obviously, they introduced some new aliens in the area and a little whisper of this quake moon that we get a lot more of in this book. But the first one was such a shambles that, there was kind of almost nowhere to go up. But this one kind of knocked my socks off with how much better it was. And it in an easy read, too, not in that it was very simple or anything, but the pace was good.
Mm-hmm. I think that's a great point. I think one of the things that this book really did, like you said, it found a way to be really interesting, really fun, and at the same time, really be focused on the story that it was trying to tell. And not only that, I think just, the readability of the book was better too. And, I think that was one of the things that was kind of frustrating about the first book, is that it didn't flow very well story-wise. It really did feel like a jumbled kind of hodgepodge of ideas and all this kind of stuff, and there was just something off about it. And I think this book really didn't have any of those issues, which was pretty amazing. I was just very impressed with that, and so I have to say, and just again, this is kind of a weird place to start because it's more like the end, but I coming into this then, and at the end to talk about it with you, I'm more excited about this series moving forward just because of the way this book went. So,
well, and after reading this one now too, although Diane Carey, who wrote the first one, I think she had a hand in creating this series, kind of the idea behind it. But I feel like she or the editors or whoever kind of hamstrung that story by saying, okay, the first book has to take place in the months, of the journey to Belle Terre, and introduce some characters. And we got introduced to some ships and some characters, but really the only one that comes over into this book, other than our main characters, is the governor. And then we get, we learn about more of the ships that we had in the first book too. But when you kind of look at that first book, you're like, well, how do you tell a story about just a 6-month warp 2 travel through space, without having all of these catastrophes that they had, and the catastrophes that happen in this book that they have to deal with just felt more natural, I guess, to the story, in dealing with this colony that they didn't really investigate before they moved in.
Yes. No, 100%. I think part of this is that, and I think we can kind of get to, the getting to this new world. I think by getting to the new world and by kind of alleviating a lot of the ships that we're jumping around on, this really helped, again, the focus of the story, because now we're just kind of dealing with everybody in one place, because they're all on the planet, and then you've got the Enterprise, and then you've got a couple of other ships that we deal with, and we end up with a lot of ship action, but it's not that thing where we're trying to jump from ship to ship to ship, kind of give a day in the life of what's happening on this trip, and all that kind of stuff. And so I was very excited that we finally got to Belle Terre, and we could actually deal with this idea of a new Earth and creating this new society and all of those type of things.
Yeah, and by the time they get there and we're actually on the planet, they talked the entire first book about how beautiful this planet was, and we actually get to see that in this. The book starts off with Kirk sitting on a beach watching a woman with her son, playing on the beach, and he just thinks this is the life, and and that's kind of a through line throughout the story too, is just thinking back to that time on the beach and Lillian Coates and her son and the things that go on with them that we'll talk about. But the way it starts off, you feel like it's this beautiful planet that's going to be, as Mary Poppins would say, practically perfect in every way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I definitely agree with you. And I thought it was one of the fun things about this, actually, for me, was that the description of the place that they're in felt very familiar to me. I live in the Pacific Northwest here, and this actually felt like the coast in Oregon, because, you've got it close to, forests and, giant rock formations, aka, there's some mountain areas nearby, that kind of thing. It just really felt like where I live, which, is a gorgeous place in the country, here in the United States. And so absolutely loved that, I could see why they would want to be here. And it, like it really brought back the idea of we're mimicking the idea of the Oregon Trail, so that's where you're going, basically, is that type of world. So I loved that. And I thought that was a lot of fun. Just even in those descriptions of the planet. I do think it's interesting too, because I wanted to ask you, because one of the things we mentioned in the first book about this idea of them going to the New World was that they wanted more freedom and everything from the Federation. But in the first book, I remember they were going to ask for Federation membership.
Yeah.
So I don't really quite understand how this is all going to work.
Yeah, that's something I'm still a little lost on myself, because there's a couple mentions of it in this one too, about the mineral or the ore or whatever that's inside the moon could make this planet rich, but then talking about having Starfleet ships protect it, but Starfleet wouldn't do that if they weren't members of the Federation. And Kirk even goes out of his way to say, like, this is your moon with your riches, basically, and almost as if like a bid to say, like, hey, you guys should join the Federation. But that was something that they'd already talked about from the beginning. So I'm still not really sure what they were trying to get away from and what they're trying to go to, if the Federation's always going to be involved anyway, unless there's a way that they could be a member and, be kind of one of those remote planets that gets a starship that goes by every few years just to check on them and drop off some supplies or pick up their Olivium or whatever. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. That was, so the idea that they might have stumbled across, one of the most incredible deposits of this thing we've never heard of in Star Trek that really helps with the creation of technology, was, pretty fascinating. And it is all a part of this quake moon that we have mentioned in the first book, the very end, and now, of course, plays a huge part in this. And what was interesting about this is that it was almost like this book was kind of helping explain why there is going to be a technological advancement between the original series movies and TNG, because they talk about giving you greater holographic technology, medical science, computers, more powerful weapons, all of these type of things, which, is really interesting. And it makes sense that this might be the start of something that would allow us to get what we think of as the TNG universe.
That's a really interesting point, because where this series is set is between motion picture and Wrath of Khan. And I was watching a little bit of the motion picture today, because as we're recording, today's the day that the 4K motion picture got released on Paramount Plus. And I forgot that in that movie, they still have like buttons and knobs and stuff on their controls on the bridge. Yep. But by the time we get into Star Trek 2, it's a lot of touch screens. And Star Trek 3, like, in that era, which is within a few years. And so that does make sense. Like, that's going to be in my headcanon now. They got this new technology from this planet that may or may not be Federation.
Well, the interesting thing is that, like you said, by the time you get to Star Trek 6, there's a lot more touchscreens. Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
And they still have some specific levers, and, I think part of that is that's really what director Nick Meyer likes. But I think, they do a really good job of kind of mixing the two. So you can kind of picture them getting to the TNG universe later on down the road. And so, I'm just, I think this was really cool and really neat. And then, of course, the problem is that this moon in and of itself is causing massive problems, because it is about to explode, and they have to find a way to be able to uncork the moon so that they have a chance of living here. One of the things that we're really frustrated about with the first book is that they didn't seem to put a lot of thought into coming to this place.
Mm-hmm.
And they hadn't done enough research on it. And now we're seeing the fruits of that labor, or the lack thereof.
I think they even said in the first book that there was at least a chance that that moon could explode, and the people were still like, "This is our planet; we'll figure it out." And yeah, it's during this book that they find out, no, it's going to explode like right now, like within I think 8 days, and which is one of the things I actually thought was pretty cool about the way this book was set up. Was it? I mean, from chapter 1, like very first thing you see countdown 8 hours 8 days and 7 hours, which just kind of, you quickly get clued into what that refers to, but like there's kind of this intrigue, like it's a hook, like immediately. But I also feel like this situation, I guess, that they find themselves in is a really interesting thing that I feel like the Star Trek genre, the Star Trek format, I guess, fits really well with, because there's this seemingly impossible situation happening that they need to solve this problem, and they actually go through a lot of science, and like they're trying to think of all of the different angles that, do we just need to get out of here? People don't want to get out of here. Okay, well, what can we do to stop it? And it just seems insurmountable, but leave it to Kirk and his crew to figure it out. But even Spock, and then there was even it's the Rattlesnake ship is what the name of the ship is. The Rattlesnake, with Captain Sun and his crew, I think, were the ones that had come out and done the survey to begin with. And they, like, kind of a side note, he actually, like, that captain actually feels bad that they didn't have all this information ahead of time. Like, he's feeling some responsibility for the situation they're in. But anyway, like the problem solving that they go through in this book, and the science and coming together and working together, I felt like really fit with this Star Trek story, into a Star Trek story, much more than anything that happened in the first book did. Like, I just felt with Spock and Kirk and all of the original series crew in there, it just felt like everybody was kind of at their best. And Uhura and Sulu, Chekhov, they're all like leading teams and have to kind of come back to the Enterprise to help solve this problem.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. In the way in which they go about solving this problem with the moon, you really do get a sense of, why the Enterprise crew is special and why they're on this mission in the first place, which is awesome. And the fact that they are basically doing the impossible here. And I think that's fantastic, and then, like you said, it is kind of neat too, because before all the stuff what happens with the moon, you've got the entire crew, working in different places on the planet to help these settlers. And one of my favorite parts is Bones, and the scientific team finding this bacteria that is really special because it's actually going to help other planets. This bacteria is actually very helpful for agriculture, and helps. It seems like new plants be able to grow in new places and to be able to grow quicker and faster, and all these type of things. And it's the type of thing that a lot of times you go to a planet in Star Trek and you end up finding, that something was bad there. Here they find out this planet is almost like an Eden, with the way that not only is it set up, except for the Quake moon, of course, but that it has these natural bacteria that actually would help with the growth of crops and things like that could actually be transplanted to other places to help. So, that was a really neat thing that this book added, and I thought was really cool as well, which I think also goes to speak to the idea of the Federation kind of growing during this time period. And maybe they can grow because they found this bacteria that helps, the Federation be able to spread out. So,
yeah, maybe it'll help terraform other planets or whatever. And Bones, he just was so excited about this that, he, even when Kirk calls him back to the Enterprise for a crisis, Bones' mind is on this bacteria and collecting as much of it as they can, especially once they find out that they may end up having to relocate these colonists. They're just trying to pack up as much of this dirt basically as they can. And, so even in the worst case scenario of them having to go somewhere else, like there's still maybe something of this planet that they could take with them. In addition to this Elysium that's inside the moon. This planet almost seems too good to be true when you really think about it, except for the quake moon that's going to maybe destroy the planet. But between the bacteria and this Elysium that's going to make them rich beyond their wildest imaginations, this is, for not having done much research, they sure kind of hit the jackpot on some things.
Yeah, and what's pretty interesting about that as well is that you have this place to which it has a blessing and a curse to it. And why this is so difficult, because, the question becomes, do we stay or do we go now? And they have a really good reason for wanting to stay. Because the other part about this that's really interesting is that they don't really have a ton of choices, because, they don't really have the ability to go back easily. And so I think this book does such a great job of setting the stakes, and it does it really in a way that is really well done. And I think what it goes to show is that, this is what happens when you're on the frontier and you can't just call for reinforcements quickly. And so I loved it. This is exactly what I thought that this type of story would be about.
Yeah, and I feel like the author kind of corrected some of the, big-headedness that the colonists had before they got there. In the first book, they were very argumentative and wanted to do things their way and didn't want Starfleet intervening. And in this book, when they would have their town meetings and Kirk or even the governor laying out the stakes that are, here's our choices that are in front of us, none of them are good, you'd get some backlash from the colonists, but then they would be provided with more information like, well, we can't go all the way back to Earth because we don't have the supplies, and we can't, do this, because the planet will be destroyed or whatever. And so, as people realize, how high the stakes are, they really kind of come together in a better way than we saw in the previous book, where they are all really in this together. And you don't have an entire ship of people saying, yeah, forget this, we just want to turn around. We've got all the colonists saying, let's do what it's going to take, or let's at least try to, we're all going to put our lives on the line to see if we can save our planet. And I thought that was a good course correction for the colonists, because they weren't very likable in the first book. And in this one, I feel like we didn't really get to know many of them, but they felt like better people, I guess, this time.
Yep. Yeah, I 100% agree with you. What did you... so part of the story with the quake moon causing these issues, one of the solutions that Kirk comes up with was the idea that the ship, the Rattlesnake, will go and search for possible other worlds where the colonists could stay. They could stay there forever, or it could just be maybe a way stop, where they could gather supplies and everything if they needed to make their way back to Federation space. And they end up running into something that is quite terrifying. And so what did you think about that part of the story?
That was probably actually one of my favorite parts of the story, just because it's another solution that they are trying, that Kirk is trying to in this problem with the Quake Moon, they're trying to solve this problem by sending another ship out, like a scout ship, to look for another place, like you said, just even as a stopover place. But with Captain Sun, the captain of the Rattlesnake, he was the one I mentioned before that is struggling with some, he feels like he should have done more work before bringing all the colonists to Belle Terre, and is feeling some responsibility. So now he's feeling even more responsibility for finding another place for them, and is cautious. I don't want to say to a fault, because it turns out, well, we actually don't know how it turns out, because it's kind of a cliffhanger on this story, but like there's this blackness that's, they find this perfect, like another perfect planet, and there's this blackness that is what they call it, that basically wiped out all of the energy and electricity and everything that's on this planet, to where all the people on the planet died off, but otherwise the planet seems like it'd be a pretty slick place because it's got infrastructure, buildings and everything. But the captain is not willing to go and report this place back to Kirk as a safe place, because they don't know exactly what happened to the people of that planet. And then they encounter this darkness, this blackness, and they are lost, basically. We don't know what happened to them. And that was, I think, one of the great cliffhangers of this story, like the perfect, I don't even want to call it a thread. It's a full-on piece of yarn that's already coming out of this tapestry that we need to grab onto in one of the other books. And I'm looking forward to hopefully visiting that.
It was I think you're absolutely right. It was a really interesting part of the story. And I thought that what was really neat about it was just kind of how terrifying this thing is. It reminds me a little bit of the probe in Star Trek 4, but it's even worse because it completely drains all power, and you can't even create more. Like, no batteries don't even work. Like, nothing works. So if it has power, it gets completely drained and it is inoperable. So this is kind of a terrifying thing that's going through the galaxy, and it's just this darkness. They have no idea what it is. There's no way for them to, be able to scan it really and understand it. And then, of course, they're too close to it and they get caught in it, and, they, for all intents and purposes, for all we know, they die. Everybody freezes to death. And so it is really, really terrifying. And it is definitely, like you said, a hanging yarn now. And so what will happen with that is really fascinating. Now, one thing, though, that I didn't love about that part of the story was the idea that you would just be able to find another M-class world that quickly. Star Trek Enterprise does a great job of reminding us that M-class worlds are rarer rather than not, and therefore you just don't you go at warp whatever and just run into one very quickly. So I think that was something that part of the story bothered me, that they were able to find one so quickly. And because it's just not realistic, really. But other than that, the rest of that part of the story I thought was great. I thought it was another one of those things where the book does a great job of alternating between action and enough explanation as to what's going on without ever dragging. Like, this book is snappy in that way, which is great.
Well, and even in that, once the Rattlesnake, once that ship loses all its power and they're in the dark, like, that was kind of a creepy part. Like, it even talks about how, like, they'd never really gone around the ship with all of the lights off and just by flashlights and everything, and not even really recognizing it. I think they were trying to find a place to be able to stay warm on the ship or whatever as they're floating around, because the gravity's all gone too. And just talking, like, it was just a very brief section, but he talked about how their ship that they lived on was now this kind of unfamiliar territory to them. And, just to think about, like, that's kind of a situation that the colonists are in too, because they're in this unfamiliar territory with an emergency happening and they don't know how they're going to get out of it. And so kind of just a nice little parallel there. But no, I'd agree with you absolutely on the planets. And he there was a couple lines too that there was 120 stars within however a day. And it's just like, wow, that's a lot of stars. And I know warp is fast, but I didn't realize it was that fast.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. No, I'm right there with you. I was like, I think that I might be a little bit off on that one. Yeah, it's good. And I think it's a really interesting storyline. So to me, I thought it was really well done, and I am very interested to now see where we're going to end up with that storyline, because like you said, we have what happened on the planet, but we also have what went down here with this ship, the Rattlesnake, and you are legitimately just left hanging. So, yep. There's another storyline here where, so because the colonists, they've made this massive trip, right? And we get some of the kids that run away, and because they don't want to leave, which, makes sense. I mean, after everything they've been through, the last thing they want to do, and they actually leave before they have any understanding of what's happening with the moon. And therefore they don't know about that yet. And so a big part of the story is them trying to find these kids before everybody dies. Yeah. And so I wanted to ask you, just how did you feel about this part of the story?
I was okay with it for the most part. It seemed like something that the kids would be thinking. With Lillian Coates' son, he asked her, you promise we can stay, and she's kind of, beating around the bush a little bit. But yeah, like if we, they're going to try to save the planet, and I want to stay too. But the thinking of these kids really is very childlike, in that if we run away, they can't leave without us. And it's actually kind of heartbreaking knowing that most of them do, like it was just Lillian that stayed back. And part of that was just because she lost her husband on the way to the planet, on the voyage there. And so her son was really the only one she had left. And the other families, they did say, took some convincing to get on the ships, but I'm a little surprised that other people in the colony didn't decide to stick around to help look for the kids. That it was just one, like of 6 kids, that just one person stayed behind. It didn't seem, I mean, we needed that for the drama, I guess, but it just seemed like there had at least been a couple people probably that would have stayed. And I'm glad too that, the kids had found the cave, because that obviously played in later in saving their lives when the moon explosion, or the whatever happens on the moon happens. I guess it wasn't the explosion, but the radiation is released. But I did appreciate that they explained why when they scanned for the kids before, they could never find them, because they scanned within like 100-mile radius. I mean, there's no way the kids could have ever gotten that far. Right. And they eventually explained that the sensors couldn't, like there was something in the rocks that the sensors couldn't penetrate. And so that made it better, especially once, like later at the end when they go looking for them after the moon business is done, that they kind of appear out of nowhere because a couple of the kids come out of the cave. So it all fit and kind of melded well together. And so I think it wasn't my favorite part of the story, but it did add some of that additional drama. I mean, if no one was on the planet, well, I guess whatever happens then, but now we've got some people that we want to save. So for that part, I did appreciate that.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. It is definitely not my favorite part of the story, but I don't think that it is one to which they spend an inordinate amount of time on. So it's not, and like you said, it's kind of that thing that you would do in a movie. If we're going to have this major story plot point, and if there's nobody on the planet that just puts one more level of like, oh my gosh, we got to get this fixed, and just one more pressure point for the story to hit. And so I think that's the thing that in the end, makes it work. And wisely, they don't spend a ton of time on it, which is great too. Yeah. So you're not. It's
another spot where they kind of keep it snappy, like you said.
Yes. Yeah. No. It's absolutely. So so we've got the solution that has to happen, and we talked a little bit about this idea, but just specifically, what did you end up thinking of the solution for fixing their moon problem?
This was one part that I vaguely remembered as I was reading it, about like pushing the moon into the other moon, and it's a little ridiculous. It's a lot ridiculous if I'm being honest, but as far as the story goes and how they set it up, they make it sound like it's a crazy plan. And so, they're almost saying like, this is ridiculous. We're going to take one moon and throw it into another moon and hope that solves our problems. And so because of that, it wasn't just like this, oh yeah, we could do this. We do this every day. We always move moons around in solar systems, like they made it sound like this, like that they barely had enough ships. And, even when their first plan doesn't work with trying to kind of pop the cork, I guess, on the moon to release the pressure, they try pushing the moon, and then they realize, okay, they can't use all of their force all at once, so they all have to use just a little bit of force, and then that way, if one of the ships has to back out, they can, compensate. And so like it's just more of that problem solving that happens that they're trying to work on the fly. So it makes this kind of ridiculous thing that they're trying to do seem just like well thought out, I guess. And so that was something that I did appreciate, that, okay, yeah, we just, and I mean, and again, like they even say it at one point in the story, like this is not something that they see every day, like witness a moon crashing into another one. And so, and even as it's happening, they're kind of describing like what it looks like and what are we expecting to see. We don't know. Is it going to bounce off or, whatever. And, so I guess to sum up, it's just like, it's this ridiculous situation that is treated very well. And, you can almost see the logic and the progression of all of their ideas.
Mm-hmm. I think you're absolutely right. I think it's the thing about it that it's so great, and where I really came personally to think like, yes, this is ridiculous as a story point, but they do all of these other maneuvers, like with the tractor beams and everything, to try and loosen it and all. And I think all of that stuff is just so great and cool, so that by the time that we get to them having to shove another moon into, another moon, we're going to shove a smaller moon into a larger moon and we're going to blow it up. It doesn't seem as crazy. And I think part of it, like what you said, and I really liked it, was that they recognize how crazy it is and they call it out, and therefore it doesn't actually feel as crazy, because they're like, yeah, this is insane. We know it. Yeah. And so I think that's something that actually makes the story work, because they're like, yeah, this is ridiculous, but it's the only that's how desperate they are. And I think that's kind of what makes the story really good, is that this desperation leads to this insane amount of creativity to get us out of this place, and find a way around it, which, I kind of love. Like, isn't that like, it's what we love about Star Trek, right? Is those kind of stories where we're coming up with ideas that seem nuts. We're pushing the boundaries of science and everything to come up with these ideas to save ourselves. And they absolutely do that here, and I think it makes it a lot of fun with the story. So,
yeah. Well, Spock, does his thing of pointing out that the chances of success are very small, within the single-digit percentages, and the people vote on it, and they're like, yeah, but if this is our only shot, like, we don't have enough supplies to get back to the Federation, so, like, if this is our only shot, let's take it. Let's do what we got to do to try to save even just half the planet. Because even if this works, which it does, like, half the planet, the main part of the planet that they've been on and we're trying to settle, is pretty much going to be unusable because of radiation and just kind of killing everything on the surface at that point. And they have to go, live on some islands on the other side of the planet. So, I mean, it's kind of one of those things like all is not lost, but they are making huge sacrifices, whatever they do in this situation. So it's kind of, at the end of the day, they were basically like, yeah, why not? Let's try taking one of the moons and throwing it into ours.
I mean, one of the things by doing this, they will have the opportunity to still leave. And yes, what it's going to require is then it to literally kind of limp home, and that's where the rattlesnake came in, with trying to find maybe another place for them to stay. And of course, we know how that story went because we talked about it. But that's what I like, is there were other parts of this and contingencies in this, and what ends up happening is not necessarily the plan that they want to go with. And so I think that's what I really liked about the story. And yeah, it's over the top and crazy, but I mean, that's kind of what makes Star Trek fun sometimes, right? So,
well, and the stakes were super high, and I'm kind of curious what you'd think. Like, there was the one ship that they lost one of their engines and didn't get their tractor beam shut off in time, and so like they were hurtling towards the planet. And I mean, I was kind of on the edge of my seat reading that, because I'm like, are they going to really destroy a ship with thousands of people on it? And they don't. Like, they save it at the exact last second before this ship crashes into the planet. But I'm wondering, do you think they should have let that, like, not they, the crews, but like the author should have let that ship get destroyed for the story to like really show that these stakes were high? I mean, they've already lost a lot of people getting to the colony to begin with, but as far as saving the planet, should they have had that sacrifice?
That's a good question. And I don't really know the answer.
I'm basically asking, do you want to kill thousands of people?
Do you want to kill a starship? Do you want all the people to die? I don't know. I think it's an excellent question, and I honestly don't know the answer. I think I was okay with everybody living, that. Like you said, there'd been enough death on this planet, and it does seem like where we're going next, the next book, there's a possibility of this really being a difficult book because of what they're about to go through. And so I'm actually really fascinated to get there. Because this colony group has a really interesting road ahead of them. And I think it's going to be harrowing. And so I'm very excited to get there. For you, with this book, I think one of the complaints that we had about the first one is characterization kind of felt off. Did you like the characterization here? Did you feel like the voices of the characters were coming through for you and feeling like they should when it comes to like, oh my gosh, that sounds like Kirk. Oh, that sounds like Spock. That sounds like Bones.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, this one was far and away better in that regard. I could hear their voices. Kirk was Kirk. He's one that you can kind of just put any character on top of and call him Kirk, but like there's something about him that if it's off, it's off. And this one, it was not. The one I would say is Bones got to me a little bit, just his negativity sometimes. I know he's always kind of been and he's my favorite character of the original series, but
same.
He always has that tendency to look at the dark side of stuff, I guess, not looking at the bright side. And there was almost a little too much of that. Like they're in this dire situation and he's saying things like, "Are you sure this is a good idea? You're going to get us all killed," or whatever. And just kind of like, come on, Bones, like have a little bit of positivity once in a while. And so every now and then that got a little over the top, but overall I'd say, yeah, the voices were so much better. And, like I said at the beginning, this just felt more like a Star Trek book. 'Cause I felt like these were not just, we didn't just throw Star Trek names on characters that were just part of another story to begin with.
Yep. I could not agree with you more. I think that this was one of those things where I felt like that the writer here did a great job of capturing what these characters sound like, which is really important when you're writing tie-in fiction. And in all honesty, it might be the most important thing to get right. Because if you don't, it really hurts the story. And so I think, props to the author for really making me feel like this was an episode of, Star Trek, the original series. Yes. Well, I'm fascinated to see then what you are going to rate Belle Terre.
Yeah, it's almost not fair 'cause having this one come right after the last one, which was not great. There was not a lot this one could have done wrong to do worse than that one. But no, I thought that this one was just so good, and like we said, it had good pacing. They really didn't waste any time, and just because of some of the ridiculousness of their solution and everything, I couldn't really go all the way up to like even a 4, but I would say it was a very strong 3.5 small moons being thrown into large moons. Yes.
Well, it's funny you say that because I'm 100% right there with you. I think that this is definitely 3.5 out of 5 Bones complaints because it's a very strong story. I think the other thing that this book has going for it is that it makes me much more interested now in where we're going with these characters and with the storyline in the first place. I think the author found a way to take the promise of this book series and actually make it come alive. And so it's a great job. Like I'm so impressed with the way that they were able to do that. And so I'm so excited, to get to the next book. And I guess at this point, we'll just see how that is.
Well, Star Trek has this thing where the second one, or the even-numbered movies are better than the odd-numbered ones. And so far, we're on track with this series. But I like you said, I'm looking forward to what this one has coming. So hopefully number 3 of this series sets that track record aside and impresses us.
Yeah, I'm right there with you, Casey. I'm definitely excited to see what this series has to offer. I'm very excited to see now where the story is going to go. We definitely have left, I think, the characters in a really rough spot, which I think is kind of fascinating and obviously gives us a really interesting place to go story-wise. And so, yeah, I can't wait to get there. But before we do, we'll be back talking with Bruce about the last part of the Left Hand of Destiny duology. So where can people find you, though, Casey, if they want to catch up with you?
Yeah, you can find me all over the place. I'm on Goodreads, Letterboxd, Twitter, and Instagram at Knitting Trekkie. I'm also on Facebook in the Babel Conference, and you can also find me over on the United Federation of Podcast Network doing a show called Mickey's Marvels, which is a podcast where we talk about anything and everything under the Disney umbrella.
And you can find me all over the place on social media under the name MattRushing02. So Twitter, Instagram, Letterboxd, Vero, any of those social media platforms, just search for my name and you'll find me there. You can also find me here on the network, on our whole other side of the network that doesn't cover Star Trek related things. It covers all the other fandoms we love because, well, there are just so many fandoms to celebrate. So check out the 602 Club. We've got some great bonus shows in that feed as well. So much happening there, and I hope you'll check that out and enjoy it. You can also find me doing Warp 5, The Orb, as well as The Artificial Tango. Warp 5 is about Star Trek Enterprise. The Orb is about Star Trek Deep Space Nine. And The Artificial Tango, Chris Jones and I are walking through all of Star Trek Picard Season 2, which has been fantastic so far. A real fun, and honestly, just a huge joy to be able to talk about so far. And then over on the Nerd Party Network, I've got a couple of shows. One is called Owlpost, I did with Drea Kaufman, and that's where we talked about every single chapter of the Harry Potter series, one chapter at a time. You'll find me doing aggressive negotiations with John Mills as we talk about Star Wars every week. But thank you so much for joining us, and until next time, live long
and read on.
You call that light reading? To each his own, number one.